I still remember the sound of that knock because it wasn't loud, desperate, or angry. It was calm, almost patient. 3 gentle taps on my apartment door at exactly 12 o'clock in the morning. I wasn't expecting anyone. My phone showed no missed calls, no messages, nothing that explained why someone would visit me at that hour. For a full minute, I simply stood in the darkness, listening. Another 3 soft knocks echoed through the hallway. I almost ignored them. If I had, everything that happened afterward would never have happened. My name is Ethan, and for most of my life I believed I understood exactly who I was. I lived quietly, worked remotely as a graphic designer, avoided unnecessary conversations, and kept my routines predictable. Every morning began with coffee by the window. Every evening ended with headphones on while I worked late into the night. People often described me as reserved. The truth was much simpler. I had become an expert at hiding, not from other people, from myself. Growing up, I had always admired elegance. It wasn't about becoming someone else. It wasn't about pretending. I simply appreciated graceful fashion, beautiful colors, careful makeup artistry, and the quiet confidence some people carried without saying a word. I never understood why those interests felt impossible to admit aloud. So I buried them. Years passed. School became college. College became work. The interests never disappeared. They simply became secrets. Late at night, I would sometimes watch fashion tutorials, styling videos, or documentaries about confidence and personal expression. I admired how clothing could completely change someone's posture, emotions, and self-esteem. Then I would close the browser and convince myself it was just curiosity. That night, however, curiosity was about to become something much bigger. I finally walked toward the door. "Who's there?" No answer. Only silence. I unlocked the door carefully. The hallway was empty. No footsteps. No elevator sounds. Nobody walking away. Only a medium-sized black box sat neatly on the welcome mat. There wasn't even a shipping label. No address. No company logo. Just one handwritten note. For the person who has waited long enough. My heart immediately started racing. I looked both directions down the hallway. Still nobody. After several moments, I picked up the surprisingly light package and carried it inside. I checked the peephole again. Nothing. It felt like whoever delivered it had disappeared into thin air. The note kept pulling my attention. For the person who has waited long enough. Waited for what? I had no idea. Part of me wanted to throw the package away, without opening it. Another part, the part one had spent years trying to silence, couldn't stop wondering what was inside. After nearly 10 minutes of arguing with myself, curiosity finally won. I lifted the lid. Inside was tissue paper folded with incredible care. Beneath it rested a beautifully tailored midnight blue dress. Next to it sat matching heels, a small jewelry box, and a handwritten envelope. I froze. Not because someone had sent feminine clothing, because whoever packed the box somehow knew my exact size. Every measurement looked perfect. That wasn't possible. I had never ordered anything like this. I had never told anyone about my hidden interests. I slowly opened the envelope. Inside was another handwritten message. "You don't have to become someone new tonight. Just stop hiding from the person you've always been." I must have read those words 20 times. Something about them felt strangely personal, almost impossible. Who knew me well enough to write this? My parents certainly didn't. My coworkers barely knew anything outside my work schedule. I had no close friends. Nobody should have known. I searched every inch of the package. No sender. No receipt. Nothing. The mystery should have frightened me. Instead, it made me curious. I carefully touched the fabric. It was soft, elegant, and surprisingly simple. Not flashy. Not dramatic. Just refined. Whoever chose it clearly understood style. I laughed quietly to myself. This is ridiculous. I closed the box, walked away, made another cup of coffee, sat on the couch, turned on the television. 5 minutes later, I was standing beside the box again. The unopened jewelry case seemed to be staring back at me. I sighed. "One look," I whispered. "That's all." The necklace inside was delicate. The earrings matched perfectly. Everything looked intentionally coordinated. Nothing felt random. Then I noticed something beneath the jewelry. A folded card. It simply read, "Confidence begins with one honest decision." Those words lingered in my mind for the rest of the night. Honest decision. Was I being honest with myself? For years I had convinced myself these interests didn't matter. That ignoring them was maturity. That pretending they didn't exist somehow made life easier. Yet every time I caught my reflection in the dark television screen, I saw someone exhausted. Not physically. Emotionally. Someone who spent too much energy hiding harmless parts of himself. Around 2 in the morning, I carried the dress toward my bedroom, then stopped halfway. This is crazy. I placed it back, walked away, returned again. I repeated that routine 4 different times before finally laughing at myself. No one was watching. No one was judging. No one even knew. With shaking hands, I hung the dress near my closet instead of putting it away. That alone felt strangely significant. It wasn't about wearing it. Not yet. It was about admitting that I didn't have to fear looking at it. When I finally climbed into bed, sleep refused to come. The mysterious visitor, the handwritten notes, the impossible measurements. None of it made sense. But something else bothered me even more. For the first time in years, I wasn't asking myself whether I should keep hiding. I was asking why I had started hiding in the first place. Outside my window, dawn slowly painted the sky with pale shades of blue. The mysterious package remained exactly where I had left it, waiting, almost as patiently as the stranger who had knocked on my door only a few hours earlier. And deep inside, I had the unmistakable feeling that midnight hadn't delivered a gift. It had delivered the first chapter of a life I never imagined I would have the courage to explore. Morning arrived, but nothing about that day felt ordinary. I usually started work the moment my coffee was ready, yet my attention kept drifting toward the bedroom where the midnight blue dress still hung from the closet door. Every few minutes, I caught myself glancing in that direction as though it might suddenly explain why it had appeared in my apartment. I finally forced myself to sit at my desk. Emails filled the screen, clients wanted revisions, and deadlines were waiting, but my mind refused to cooperate. Even the smallest design decisions felt impossible because the questions in my head were much louder than anything on my computer. Who had left the package? How did they know my measurements? Why did their words feel like they understood thoughts I had never spoken aloud? By lunchtime, I had barely completed half an hour of work. I closed my laptop and walked into the bedroom again. The dress looked just as elegant in the daylight. It wasn't extravagant or covered in glitter like the costumes people often imagined. Instead, it was simple, tasteful, and beautifully tailored. The fabric reflected the sunlight in soft shades of navy, almost like the evening sky before the first stars appear. For several minutes, I simply stood there. Then, I did something I had never allowed myself to do before. I picked it up without feeling guilty. The material felt light between my hands, and instead of embarrassment, I felt curiosity. I examined every stitch, every seam, every tiny detail. Whoever designed it cared about craftsmanship. As I was placing it back on the hanger, something slipped from one of the inside pockets. Another envelope. I frowned. I'm sure this wasn't here before. Inside was a folded piece of paper. It read, "If you're reading this, you've already taken the first step. The second isn't about changing your appearance. It's about changing the way you speak to yourself. Today, don't criticize yourself even once." That sentence stayed with me. Don't criticize yourself even once. At first it sounded easy. It wasn't. Within minutes, my mind automatically began repeating old habits. This is strange. You shouldn't be interested in this. What if someone finds out? You'll regret even thinking about it. I stopped. The notes suddenly made perfect sense. The hardest judgment wasn't coming from strangers. It was coming from me. For years, I had been my own harshest critic. I decided to try something different. Every time a negative thought appeared, I replaced it with a simple question. What if I'm allowed to enjoy beautiful things? What if curiosity isn't something to fear? What if confidence starts with honesty? The answers didn't arrive immediately, but the questions themselves felt freeing. Later that afternoon, my phone rang. It was my younger sister, Emma. We hadn't spoken in almost 2 weeks. "You sound tired," she said almost immediately. "Just busy." "No," she laughed softly. "You're thinking about something." She had always been able to read me better than anyone else. "I guess I am." "You know," she continued, "when we were kids, you always noticed things other people ignored." "What do you mean?" "You'd compliment people's shoes before you noticed their faces." I laughed. "I did. Every time. Mom thought it was adorable." I smiled despite myself. "I don't even remember that." "I do." There was a short silence before she spoke again. "You're allowed to change, Ethan." Her words caught me completely off guard. "What makes you say that?" "I don't know. Just a feeling." We talked for another 20 minutes about ordinary life before ending the call, but her sentence stayed with me long afterward. "You're allowed to change." That evening I decided to organize my apartment. Whenever my thoughts became overwhelming, cleaning usually helped. As I rearranged books on a shelf, I found an old sketchbook buried inside a storage box. Dust covered the cover. I hadn't opened it in nearly 10 years. Curious, I flipped through the pages. Landscape drawings, logos, character designs. Then, halfway through the notebook, fashion sketches. Dozens of them. Elegant dresses, different hairstyles, accessories, color combinations. I stared at them in disbelief. I had completely forgotten they existed. Every page was dated from my late teenage years. Back then I had dreamed of becoming a fashion illustrator before convincing myself it wasn't practical or acceptable. The drawings weren't perfect, but they were full of imagination. I couldn't stop smiling. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking at something I had hidden with shame. I was looking at proof that this interest had always been part of me, not because someone else suggested it, not because of a trend, because it genuinely fascinated me. As evening approached, another surprise arrived. There was a soft knock at my apartment door. 3 gentle taps. Exactly like the night before. My heart started pounding. I hurried toward the entrance and opened it almost immediately. Nobody. Again. Only a small white envelope rested neatly on the floor. I picked it up. This time there was only one sentence inside. "Meet me tomorrow at 7. Rosewood Cafe. Come exactly as you feel comfortable." No signature. No explanation. No pressure. Just an invitation. I searched online for Rosewood Cafe. It was a quiet little place across town with excellent reviews and dozens of photos showing cozy lighting, bookshelves, and fresh flowers on every table. Nothing suspicious. Nothing mysterious. Still, how could I trust someone whose identity remained completely hidden? I spent the rest of the evening debating whether to ignore the invitation. Common sense told me not to go. Curiosity kept whispering that I would regret missing whatever answers waited there. Before going to bed, I stood in front of the bedroom mirror. Not wearing the dress, not trying to become anyone else, just looking honestly at myself. For years, I had avoided doing that. I usually looked only long enough to shave or fix my hair. Tonight was different. I looked into my own eyes. I saw someone carrying years of unnecessary fear. Someone who had spent more energy hiding than living. Someone who deserved kindness from the person staring back. Without thinking, I smiled. It wasn't a dramatic transformation. It wasn't confidence. Not yet. But it was hope. Real hope. As I turned off the bedroom light, I noticed something I was certain hadn't been there before. Resting on top of the dresser, beside the unopened jewelry box, was a tiny silver key attached to a pale blue ribbon. There was no note. No explanation. Only 2 tiny engraved words on the key itself. "Keep going." I held it tightly in my hand, wondering what it unlocked. For some reason, I had a feeling the answer wasn't a door. It was a part of my life that had remained locked for far too long. And tomorrow evening, at exactly 7 o'clock, someone was finally going to help me discover what was waiting on the other side. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, but instead of feeling rested, I felt the kind of nervous excitement that makes every hour seem twice as long. My eyes immediately found the small silver key resting on my bedside table. I picked it up, turning it slowly between my fingers. It was old-fashioned, beautifully polished, and surprisingly heavy for its size. Whatever it belonged to, someone clearly wanted me to keep it close. Throughout the day, I tried to focus on work, but my thoughts kept returning to the invitation. Rosewood Cafe. 7 o'clock. Come exactly as you feel comfortable. Those last 5 words echoed louder than anything else. They didn't tell me how to dress. They didn't expect me to impress anyone. They simply asked me to arrive honestly. That felt strangely comforting. By late afternoon, I stood in front of my closet, looking from one side to the other. My usual clothes suddenly felt like a uniform I had worn for years without thinking. Then my eyes drifted toward the midnight blue dress. I hesitated. For a long moment, I simply stood there. Part of me wanted to wear it. Another part reminded me that I had never stepped outside my apartment dressed differently. The thought alone made my heart race. I smiled to myself. Not today. Instead, I chose a clean navy sweater, dark jeans, polished shoes, and a light gray coat. It was still me, but I spent a little more time than usual making sure everything fit well. I even styled my hair instead of rushing through it like every other morning. When I looked into the mirror, I noticed something unexpected. I wasn't trying to hide anymore. It was a small difference, but I could see it in my posture. I left the apartment carrying only my wallet, my phone, and the mysterious silver key in my pocket. The evening air felt cool as I walked through the city. The streets were alive with conversations, restaurants filling with customers, and musicians performing near the square. For the first time in months, I wasn't rushing home after work. I was simply observing the world around me. Rosewood Cafe appeared exactly as it had in the photographs. Warm lights glowed behind large windows. Fresh flowers decorated every table. Soft piano music floated quietly through the room. It felt peaceful. As I stepped inside, a smiling waitress greeted me. "Good evening. Table for one." Before I could answer, she looked at me with a knowing smile. "You must be Ethan." I froze. "How do you know my name?" She reached beneath the counter and handed me a small cream-colored envelope. "This was left for you yesterday." My heartbeat quickened. I thanked her and carefully opened it. Inside was another handwritten message. "You're already more confident than you realize. Table 7. I looked across the cafe. Near the back window stood a small table with a single chair. No one else was waiting. Confused, I walked over and sat down. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. I began wondering if someone was playing an elaborate joke. Just as I considered leaving, an older woman approached my table carrying 2 cups of tea. She had silver hair tied neatly behind her head and kind eyes that seemed to notice everything without making me uncomfortable. "May I sit?" she asked. I nodded cautiously. She smiled. "I've been hoping we'd meet." "I'm sorry," I said politely. "Do I know you?"
No.
"Then, how do you know me?" "I know your mother." The words caught me completely off guard. "My mother?" She nodded gently. "Many years ago." "My mother never mentioned you." "I'm not surprised." She took a slow sip of tea before continuing. "When your mother was young, she often came to my tailoring studio." I blinked. Tailoring. She loved designing clothes. I stared at her in disbelief. "My mother never designed clothes." The woman smiled softly. "Not after life became busy. But before that, she was one of the most creative people I'd ever met." My mind struggled to process what I was hearing. Growing up, my mother had worked in an accounting office. Everything about her life seemed practical and organized. I had never imagined she once dreamed of becoming a designer. The woman reached into her handbag and placed a worn photograph on the table. There, smiling beside several mannequins dressed in elegant handmade outfits, stood a much younger version of my mother. I recognized her immediately. "This," I whispered, "is real." The woman nodded. "Very real." I couldn't stop looking at the photograph. My mother looked genuinely happy, confident, creative, almost like a completely different person. "She used to tell me something," the woman continued. "What?" "Never let fear choose your future." Those words settled deep inside me. The older woman looked directly into my eyes. "You remind me of her." I laughed nervously. "I think you've mistaken me for someone else."
No.
She smiled warmly. You both hide your dreams behind responsibility. Silence filled the table. For the first time in years, I couldn't think of a single excuse. She was right. After several moments, she asked, "Would you like to see something?" I nodded. She reached into another pocket and carefully unfolded several fashion sketches. The moment I saw them, I felt the air leave my lungs. The drawing style, the tiny handwritten notes, the color combinations, they looked almost identical to the sketches I had rediscovered in my apartment. "I've seen these before," I whispered. The woman smiled.
No.
"You've seen something inspired by them." She pointed toward one elegant evening dress. "Your mother designed this when she was 24. I couldn't believe it. Without realizing it, I reached for my phone and opened the photographs I had taken of my old sketchbook the previous evening. I placed one beside her drawing. The similarities were impossible to ignore. She studied the image quietly before smiling. Creativity often finds its way through generations. For the next hour, we talked about fashion, colors, confidence, posture, and how clothing could affect the way people carry themselves. Not once did she tell me who I should become. She never judged my interests or questioned my curiosity. Instead, she spoke about authenticity. "The goal," she said gently, "is never to wear something because you're hiding." She paused before continuing. "It's to wear something because you've stopped hiding." Those words felt different from every conversation I had ever had. When I finally stood to leave, she handed me a beautifully wrapped package no larger than a book. "I believe this belongs with you now." "What is it?" "You'll understand when you're ready." Before I could ask another question, she smiled kindly. "And Ethan?" "Yes. Your mother asked me to give this to you one day." I felt my heart skip. "My mother?" She said that if you ever started searching for confidence instead of approval, I should know. I stared at her in complete silence. She knew. The woman didn't answer directly. Instead, she simply looked at me with the kind of smile that carried years of untold stories. Outside, rain had begun falling softly across the city. I walked home holding the mysterious package beneath my coat, my thoughts racing faster than ever before. When I reached my apartment, I carefully placed the package on the dining table. Inside was a beautifully crafted wooden box. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Resting inside was an old leather journal. On the very first page, written in unmistakably familiar handwriting, were 6 words that brought tears to my eyes. "For Ethan, when he's finally ready." For several minutes, I couldn't bring myself to touch the journal. I simply stared at my name written across the first page, tracing each letter with my eyes as if doing so would somehow explain how it had found its way into my apartment after all these years. My mother had passed away 3 years earlier. We had always been close, but there were parts of her life she rarely talked about. I had accepted that everyone carried private memories. I never imagined one of those memories would eventually lead back to me. With a deep breath, I turned the page. The first entry was dated nearly 25 years ago. "If you're reading this, my dear Ethan, then you've finally become curious enough to ask questions instead of running away from them. I hope that means you've also learned to be kinder to yourself than I was." I felt my throat tighten. She knew my name long before I could read these words. She had written them years before I was old enough to understand. I continued reading. "When you were little, you loved colors. While other children rushed toward toy cars and action figures, you quietly wandered through fabric stores with me. You touched every material you could reach. Velvet, silk, cotton, you smiled at all of them. I never wanted to tell you what you should or shouldn't like. I only wanted you to stay curious." Without realizing it, tears began rolling down my face. The memory returned with surprising clarity. I remembered holding her hand inside a small fabric shop. I remembered laughing while running my fingers across rows of colorful cloth. Until that moment, I had completely forgotten. The next page explained even more. "I also watched something change as you grew older. You became quieter. Every year you apologized more often for simply being yourself. Nobody forced those words into your mouth. You learned them by watching the world around you." I closed my eyes. She had noticed. She had seen everything. Every awkward smile. Every unfinished sentence. Every time I pretended to lose interest in something because I feared someone else's opinion. Another page contained only one sentence. Confidence grows where shame is no longer welcome. I read it again. Then again. The words settled somewhere deep inside me. The journal wasn't trying to convince me to become anyone else. It wasn't encouraging me to copy another person. It was asking me to stop rejecting parts of myself simply because I feared being misunderstood. Near the middle of the journal, an envelope slipped onto the table. Inside was an old photograph. It showed my mother standing beside the same silver-haired tailor I had met at Rosewood Cafe. Both of them were smiling proudly beside a display of elegant handmade dresses. On the back of the photo, my mother had written, "Dreams never disappear. Sometimes they simply wait for the right generation." I smiled through my tears. For years, I believed my interests had appeared from nowhere. Now I understood that creativity had always been part of my family story. Late that evening, my phone buzzed. It was my sister, Emma. "I was just thinking about you," she said. "I actually wanted to ask you something." "What is it?" "Did Mom ever talk to you about fashion design?" There was a long silence. Then she laughed softly. "So, you found the journal." I froze. "You knew about it?" "Not exactly." "What do you mean?" "Mom once told me she had written something for you. She said I'd understand one day if you ever asked me that question." I sat down slowly. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" "Because she didn't want you to feel pressured. She wanted you to discover things when you were ready." Everything suddenly made sense. The mysterious package, the tailor, the journal. None of it was random. Someone had simply honored a promise made years ago. After hanging up, I walked into my bedroom. The midnight blue dress still hung exactly where I had left it. For the first time, I didn't see it as something mysterious. I saw it as a symbol, a reminder that confidence begins with honesty. Slowly, I reached for it. My hands no longer trembled. I carefully changed into the outfit, paying attention to every detail. I added the delicate necklace from the jewelry box and stood quietly in front of the mirror. I expected embarrassment. Instead, I felt calm, not because I looked completely different, but because, for the first time in years, I wasn't criticizing every part of myself. I adjusted the sleeves, smoothed the fabric, took one slow breath, then smiled. It wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about trying to convince anyone else. It was simply a private moment of acceptance. I picked up my sketchbook from the bookshelf and sat beside the bedroom window. For the next 2 hours, I filled page after page with new designs. Elegant evening wear, modern jackets, creative color palettes. Ideas flowed naturally, as though they had been waiting patiently behind a locked door. I didn't notice how late it had become until another familiar sound echoed through the apartment. 3 gentle knocks. Midnight. Exactly like before. This time I smiled before opening the door. No fear. No hesitation. Once again, the hallway was empty. Only a small envelope rested neatly on the welcome mat. Inside was a single handwritten card. "You've remembered who you are. Now it's time to discover what you're capable of. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. The Silver Atelier." Below the message was an address. I searched it online. It was a small design studio located in the oldest part of the city. Its website showed handmade clothing, fashion illustrations, and creative workshops for beginners. At the bottom of the homepage was one sentence that immediately caught my attention. "We don't create confidence. We help people discover the confidence they already have." I couldn't stop smiling. The silver key was still resting in my pocket. Almost without thinking, I held it beside the computer screen. The shape of the key looked remarkably similar to the logo displayed on the studio's website. A quiet laugh escaped my lips. Maybe, just maybe, tomorrow wasn't simply another invitation. Maybe it was the door the key had been waiting to unlock all along. Sleep came easily for the first time in weeks. There were no restless thoughts, no endless questions, and no fear of what tomorrow might bring. Whatever waited for me at the Silver Atelier, I was finally ready to face it with an open mind. The next morning, I tucked the silver key into my coat pocket and left my apartment just after 9. The city felt different. The streets were the same, the people were the same, yet I noticed details I had ignored for years. The colors of flower stands, reflections in shop windows, and strangers confidently expressing themselves without apologizing for who they were. By the time I reached the old district, the Silver Atelier came into view. It wasn't a large building. It occupied the corner of a quiet street, surrounded by brick walls covered in ivy and climbing roses. Large windows revealed mannequins dressed in elegant handmade designs, while sketches and fabric samples decorated the walls inside. Above the entrance hung a simple silver emblem. It matched the shape of the key perfectly. I smiled. So this is where it belongs. The front door wasn't locked. Inside, warm sunlight poured through tall windows, filling the room with soft golden light. Shelves overflowed with fabrics of every texture and color imaginable. Wooden tables held sewing tools, sketchbooks, measuring tapes, and unfinished garments. The entire studio felt alive with creativity. The silver-haired woman from Rosewood Cafe greeted me with the same kind smile. I had a feeling you'd come. I removed the silver key from my pocket. I think this belongs here. She gently shook her head.
No.
No. It belongs to you. Confused, I looked down at the key. I don't understand. She walked toward an old wooden cabinet standing against the back wall. It had no visible handle, only a small keyhole shaped exactly like the one I carried.
Go ahead, she said.
I inserted the key. It turned smoothly. The cabinet doors slowly opened. Inside were dozens of journals, sketchbooks, framed photographs, and carefully preserved fashion illustrations created by students over many years. At the very center sat one empty leather portfolio with my name embossed in silver letters. Ethan. I stared at it in disbelief. What is this? It's a tradition, she explained. Every person who discovers their true creative voice leaves something behind for the next generation. I carefully opened the portfolio. The first page was blank. Only one sentence appeared at the bottom. Your story begins where fear ends. I smiled. For the first time, a blank page didn't intimidate me. It invited me. The woman handed me a pencil. I think it's your turn. I looked around the studio. Several people of different ages were quietly working on sketches and designs. Some were sewing, others painting, and a few simply sat with notebooks, exchanging ideas. No one judged anyone else. No one laughed at another person's interests. Everyone simply created. I sat at the empty desk. Without overthinking, I began sketching. The pencil moved almost effortlessly across the paper. Lines became silhouettes. Silhouettes became elegant designs. One outfit became 2, then 5, then 10. Hours disappeared. When I finally looked up, the room was nearly empty. The silver-haired woman returned carrying 2 cups of tea. She examined the sketches with quiet admiration. Your mother would be smiling. Those words meant more than any compliment I had ever received. I wish I could show these to her. She smiled softly. I think you just did. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt peaceful. Before leaving, she handed me one final envelope. This is the last thing she asked me to give you. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside was a single handwritten letter. My dear Ethan, if you've reached this page, then you've finally stopped asking permission to be yourself. I never wanted you to become the person other people expected. I only hoped you would become someone who greeted every morning without fear. Life will always introduce people who misunderstand kindness, creativity, or differences. Don't let them decide who you are. Wear what brings you confidence. Create what brings you joy. Treat people with compassion. Keep learning. Keep growing. And whenever life feels uncertain, remember something I once forgot for far too many years. The bravest thing a person can do isn't pretending to be someone else. It's living honestly. I'm already proud of you. Love always, Mom. By the time I finished reading, tears blurred every word. Not tears of sadness. Tears of gratitude. For years I had searched for answers in other people. The greatest answer had been waiting in my mother's own handwriting. I carefully folded the letter and placed it inside the journal. As I stepped outside, the afternoon sun warmed the old streets. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was walking away from something. I felt like I was walking toward my future. Over the following months, my life changed in quiet but meaningful ways. I continued my design work during the day, but every evening I returned to the silver atelier. I learned new techniques, improved my sketches, and met people who valued creativity and authenticity. I discovered that confidence wasn't something you suddenly achieved. It grew little by little, every time you chose honesty over fear. Eventually, I created my first small collection of elegant designs inspired by the midnight blue dress that had started everything. During the exhibition opening, visitors admired the craftsmanship and the emotion behind each piece. Many asked what inspired the collection. I simply smiled. It all started with a simple knock at midnight. They thought I was speaking metaphorically. Only I knew the full story. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear distant footsteps echoing through my apartment hallway. Every now and then, I pause and smile, remembering the evening that changed everything. No matter where life takes me, I will always be grateful that I opened that door instead of ignoring it. Because the greatest gift waiting outside wasn't a dress. It wasn't the mysterious key. It wasn't even a journal filled with memories. It was the courage to stop hiding. And once I found that courage, I realized something that had been true all along. The person I had spent my entire life searching for had been waiting patiently inside me from the very beginning.